Color matching. While attempting to not sound reductive, this is the main premise of Zuma. Making a minimum of 3 touching and uniform colored balls in a row explode until a satisfactory point amount is achieved, and then a level is cleared of balls. Unlike some more popular games such as Tetris or Puyo Puyo, a wide variety of layouts are available to change the route of which spheres flow down. There's 22 maps of varying curves and length, with some sporting 2 simultaneous lanes for this game's main campaign and gauntlet side mode. It's a rather simple premise to understand, needing a single screen with a few animations and words to get most of its info across, and a simple 2-button control scheme to help give this game a fairly low skill floor. What isn't mentioned is easily discoverable within a reasonable amount of time, or gets exposited via this game's simple and serviceable hint system. To also separate this game further from other more popular puzzle and tile matching series, the goal of this game is to clear an incoming, strung together horde of colored objects, instead of slowly forming numerous shapes and stacks of different configurations. A decent selection of power-ups also take an unchecked, unchangeable prominent role to aid progression. Likewise, a few more mechanics in the form of same colored balls magnetizing to each other, a momentum system when balls roll backwards, the speed of balls rolling dependent on the current length and position, coins for extra points that incentivize snappy, precise plays, gap bonuses, and combos, all give a standard premise the player expression and diversity it needs to alleviate potential boredom and stay interesting as the difficulty climbs and climbs. While seemingly simple to grasp at first, it's a style of game that is ever changing with the ability to speed things up almost always being at the player's whim. Many possible decisions can emphasize different play styles or pull attention momentarily from concurrent mindsets. As a concept, however, Zuma wasn't the first to try its hand at this. To look at its origins would mean to take a glance at Puzzloop, also known as Ballistic outside of Japan. This is all thanks to the president of Mitchell Corporation, Roy Ozaki, making a big stink about being ripped off for their concept in an interview, while PopCap far from copies the game in a lazy manner. Zuma is a take on the same concept, but an expansion and more realized in most aspects, maintaining and emphasizing the main appeal whilst having a focused presentation, something the original Puzzloop is shockingly shoddy at executing. Puzzloop's presentation was one plastered with bad audio mixing and a pretty indecipherable, unfocused visual style, both of these factors failing to hit a mark of even average quality. Basic words on screen are wonky and out of place, while being in a number of different fonts, gradients, outlines, and colors with little cohesion. It's seemingly meant to go for a more ethereal, weird style, but it comes off as doing random, uninspired backgrounds of a random color with random objects, sometimes just being numbers, sometimes they're chains, sometimes it's a clock. It's different for the sake of being different, with nothing in terms of remotely notable highlights that push the hardware on a technical level or are unique in some way. Static, flat textures with no 3D or animation work done to them. It's nothing weird or crazy at all. The creativity here is missing. The main music that plays also consists of a pathetically short 8-second loop, while the panic track is exceedingly overbearing and obnoxious, in part due to being an even shorter loop of a few instruments, like a garage band performed by first graders. Some of this music also gives off a tropical vibe of all things, when that's clearly not the aesthetic. Mitchell Corporation outright intended to file a lawsuit of IP infringement against PopCap in 2004, but this didn't go anywhere, and without the reach of a settlement. Suffice to say, they wouldn't have had a case to put forth anyways, as a lawyer from PopCap simply replied with a nonchalant email on the matter. Calling Zuma a clone of Puzzloop is a heavy disservice to PopCap. They took nothing more than a sloppy proof of concept and ran with it, doing it proper justice. It wouldn't be in any conversations if it weren't for Zuma, and you'll forget it exists once this video's over, and you've clicked elsewhere. Almost no aspects besides having uninspired multiplayer stapled on top, and the few types of stage hazards are something I wish PopCap decided to also salvage. They add a decently inspired layer to the present challenge of aiming and timing one's shots. Nonetheless, the title of Zuma Deluxe had me curious if this version was actually the first or a follow-up. given the word deluxe and its commonly intended connotation for some games. Turns out there is a title before this one, as the true, original version of Zuma that sometimes goes by Zuma Classic. It's been so firmly swamped by the existence of Deluxe, and so plainly undocumented that finding a web version took some notable digging to discover it all. It's a version without the word Deluxe, and the game is shorter just like its name, one that has less meat to its bones but still being the same core experience. It's just a straight ROM through a set selection of stages with even less presentation values due to a lack of music or level transitions. No gauntlet mode, less detailed looking environments, the works. It mostly has value in it being a historical stepping stone for Zuma Deluxe. The original layouts exclusive to this version are worth very little in the grand scheme of things. Even still, if this was the only version to exist, it would still blow Puzzloop out of the water. Here's an example of how far it can go, and the main reason the gameplay between Zuma and Puzzloop presents a chasm of difference in quality. The gameplay found in Zuma carries with it potentially rapid fire and deep rooting execution. Very quickly once a stage starts, almost immediately, balls start rolling in, and the player can get to thinking what moves to make. 2 colored balls are available to shoot at the moment, and a few progressing orbs are coming down. There's this many balls of this color to match with, and this many for the secondary color. Another question: is a chain possible with any of these colors that can be aimed at? If so, what's needed to get that going? And another: which is the best choice right now? Well, now the decision has been made, and now a new set of choices is available with another color. What now? Well, these are the available options for this new color. Is making a chain possible? All of this has gone through someone's mind in the span of less than 5 seconds, and it only repeats. This quick game of what to do next, and how some actions can influence other factors while repeatedly rinsing and repeating this evolving process. Even if nothing immediately happens besides someone just making simple clears and chains without a second's thought, power-ups will also randomly appear with a few factors in the back of one's mind like shooting through a gap, combos, coins, or magnetizing balls backwards. Over time, 2 simple factors additionally tweak the gameplay with increased ball rolling speed and ball color count, and it's all this structure needs to keep its difficulty always progressing. Puzzloop by comparison lacks most of these supplemental systems, while only offering one very static map that's nothing but a single slightly changing spiral, instead of having a decent variety to offer. I'm a competent enough player, but I'm far from interested enough in being capable of pushing this game to the point of nearly triple-digit Sun God levels, so I hope this does a decent representation of how fast thinking and reaction heavy this game can get. In an awkward design choice though, there's no option whatsoever to disable power-ups at all. As a factor most will experience while playing this game's main campaign, it's the one thing I would absolutely change. The luck this game brings exists in an unrefined manner that's unbalanced and unpredictable. Zuma's biggest problem is how it handles its RNG. Sometimes the fight to stay alive is a very tense, on the edge of your seat game, as you sweat bullets to frantically make matches and keep the line at bay. And other times the game just throws its hands up and says, "Hey, come on in." Being drip-fed or drowned in get-out-of-jail cards is too often an unreliable aspect with how they spawn. Likewise, whether or not someone is even in a position to take advantage of them if they're currently struggling to stay afloat on some maps with layering lanes. The single factor that makes this game's pill of RNG factor easier to swallow when compared to another popular PopCap puzzle title is simply the inclusion of infinite launchable balls as opposed to only a set amount. A good enough player can go without any power-ups just fine, and even succeed really well. But from my own experience, I'd say most people who try this game's main story mode won't be that proficient without an unnecessary amount of investment to learn the ins and outs first. Ace times are also a goal that don't make any sense in their current iteration. Ace times are very dumbfounding as an addition thanks to how luck works in this game. They're the benchmark for showing someone has mastered level, but it'd be no surprise if ace times were just lazily made slightly different from one another, resulting in a huge majority of players rolling the dice in order to randomly get a time bonus of over a minute with the same amount of effort as many other attempts. Anyways, although PopCap's lack of long-term care for artistic preservation has left some other classic titles unfairly neglected when running on more modern systems, they're the equivalent of framed pictures that need a light wiping with a rag, as opposed to metal structures succumbing to rust and decay. Zuma's aesthetic visuals were a creative and pretty out there choice. The maps are pretty diverse, and represent different places that are a healthy, broad spectrum of organic and man-made pathways. A wide assortment of shades from a healthy color palette was used, the fact that they're more muted colors being fairly apt for the temple spelunking the story has. They come accompanied with admittedly basic ingrained symbols for a bit more difference between each other. I say basic in a more indifferent manner than positive though, because almost none of the layouts are trying to really adhere to any notable Aztec symbolism or true culture figures. There's lost potential in theming these accurately to Aztec gods and what they each represent, but seemingly nothing was referenced to a notable degree besides the sun god. Here's an example or two. These layouts are named after the god of corn, the god of rain, and the god of wind. Beats me as to why though. The appearances and lack of nuance are self-evident. The main menus just plainly reference temples without any nuance, the most redeemable aspect being the blocky and long letters ingrained into the stones and for the UI. Of course, most people won't know or care to look into the minutiae or accuracy of solid Aztec representation, so this is mostly to note that any worthwhile references are lacking. It's an above average graphical presentation all things considered, but misses the mark on being great about doing proper research. This all looks unfortunately somewhat blurry and muddy on higher resolutions, with no option to properly resize the window or upscale the textures present, even with modding as a possibility. There's a few programs like Magpie that can get around this issue, but it's something that should have been patched in at some point. The textures are thus stuck with this grainy look that leaves this game without the spit shine it deserves, but thankfully some features like the balls are mostly unaffected with the lack of developer foresight. Exceptional sound design was one of PopCap's notable strengths, and here it's very well accounted for. There's quite a few different sound effects and voice clips to accompany menus and game statuses, for win and fail states, explosions, chains, combos, the ball shooting and clanging sound that are endlessly enjoyable to listen to. The list goes on. Even clicking menus has its own unique flair, with the tenser music and slowly quickening heartbeat being a simple and marvelous choice for when someone is close to failing. In due time, a sequel would be made, and Zuma's Revenge is its name. It would then go on to do much of the same, adding several simple changes to help refine it a bit more, having over 3 times the amount of maps, including several menus for keeping track of stats, new boss fights, better visuals, and more, even though the main issue of luck with power-ups remains unresolved. Zuma's Revenge does enough in expanding the foundation into one that's vastly more varied and substantial, just about squeezing into the list of my favorite games. Even if Zuma Deluxe isn't the much more realized sequel, it's still a readily accessible title that's notably hard to master. It's one of PopCap's classics for good reason. It's executed with grace, but its vastly more girthy follow-up keeps me apprehensive from labeling Zuma Deluxe as a title I can also avidly recommend. Even if it wasn't the first, I can confidently say that its quality was the reason it spawned so many copycats to take after it, and not after Puzzloop. If anything, Zuma is the reason so many games of this style existed after its inception. This is a gameplay formula that can still be taken further and in different directions, but the marks Zuma reached as a series are still pretty lofty.